Now, as far as persuasive speeches go, there's really three main types that we look at. There's a proposition of fact, there's a proposition of value, and a proposition of policy, and you approach each one of them a little bit differently. So we're going to look in detail at all three of these. And for examples, I'm going to use the same subject in each one so that you can see how you change the speech to match which one of these you're going for. Because sometimes you're going to present something about a fact. This is or is not true. This is or is not real. And you've got to support that and convince your audience that they agree with you. Sometimes it's we need to make a change to the laws, which, you know, anybody that gets involved in city government or county government has to go to the city council meetings and argue about should we put parking meters downtown. When we did that in Bloomington, there was a big discussion about that, and that was a proposition of policy. Did we want to change what was going on down there because it used to be free parking? Sometimes you'll have value arguments about this is what is good and this is why it's good, and you should want to have that. So you have three different kinds of arguments, and you need to know which one you're going to present. So propositions of fact are pretty simple. It's things are or are not something. So you're going to prove whatever your concept is good or bad, true or false, that kind of thing. And you're going to use a lot of logical arguments and a lot of facts in order to support what you're trying to say. So the example here, marijuana does not cause significant health problems. That's a fact. Let's say, and I've got a couple of people, I think, well, maybe not in this class, in my online class, I've got a couple that are proposing marijuana be legal in all 50 states. If they go proposition of fact, this is the way they would go. Marijuana has no significant health problems related to it. And then you go in and you pull up all the studies that support that, and all the, you know, university studies, hospital studies, long-term medical studies, all of that stuff that supports whether or not that is true or that is false. And really, that's all you're looking for. It's either true or false, good or bad, that kind of thing. And you use a whole lot of fact and logic in order to support your reasoning. There's not a lot of emotion in this particular argument. The next one would be a proposition of value. Now, this one's a little bit harder to establish because value, back when we talked about ethics, I said, does everybody have the same ethics? And we said, no, they don't. We don't all have the same idea of what is a value either. So in this case, you've got to prove that your concept is either morally right or you're trying to prove that this is bad and it's morally wrong. This is a proposition of value is used a lot when you're having a discussion about abortion, for example. You argue about whether or not abortion is morally right or morally wrong. So that becomes a value statement. You decide what is the value of life in that particular argument, and where does life begin. That's why you hear a lot of that kind of argument if you followed anything along those lines. So you have to establish what is the evaluation criteria of good or bad, which is way different than fact. Fact is true or false. The evidence will usually support that. But in this one, now you've got people's ethical beliefs in it, and you've got their moral standings involved, and you have to convince them that this is good and this is bad, and you have to convince them where the line is. So you not only are proving your point, but you're proving where is the true value of something. So in this case, legalizing alcohol while banning marijuana is unfair. That's a value statement. You have to establish in that argument that alcohol and marijuana are essentially equal in terms of health effects and what they do to people. And, you know, you want to equate the two, and alcohol's legal, so why isn't marijuana legal? This argument was used when we came out of prohibition for alcohol versus smoking cigarettes, tobacco, because you were again looking at a value. This is valued as being important, legalizing alcohol, but marijuana is not viewed as being morally right. And then you start talking about what is the definition of morally right, and why is marijuana on one side of the line when it should be on the other. And so that's a whole different argument than the health issues of marijuana, which is pretty much based off of fact. So you have a harder goal here, because you're trying to establish that your idea of value is what the world should see it as value. Then the third one is policy. This is pretty much a course of action needs to be taken. It's usually regarding around laws or around policies in a company, for example. In this kind of an argument, you need to establish that there is, first place, a need for a change because you're going against the status quo. You also need to have a plan of how to make the change so that it achieves the goal with the least impact on people. And then you talk about the practicality of it. What's the dollars? What's the time frame? All of that kind of thing. So you actually come into a proposition of policy with a plan and a whole system. So you have to discuss your system. There's a little bit of value in there about why you need to make this change, but that's where the need comes in. You know, we're doing this isn't being met, so there's a need that has to be satisfied. Here's my plan for satisfying that need, and then you go through it and you try to motivate people. Yeah, you're right, we need to change a policy. Again, it's a completely different kind of an argument than value is or fact is. So every one of you has a persuasive topic picked out. You need to be thinking about, is my topic fact oriented? Is it value oriented? Is it policy oriented? And then knowing that, I've got to work my speech along those lines. So if it's value, for example, you've got to build in there establishing what the value actually is and why your view of the value is the way everyone should view it. So you've got to support that. If it's facts, you can pretty much just bring forth all the facts from the studies and stuff and hit it with a lot of logic and hopefully be successful. If it's policy, you've got to present how, which is a whole nother thing. So you want to understand which one of those three your particular topic is for your persuasive speech. In this case, marijuana should be legalized. This is going over all over the country right now. We've got some states it's legal, some states it's not. This is always a policy argument. Sometimes it should be, medical marijuana. Sometimes it's medical and recreational. And you have to bring forth a plan of, this is why you have to make this change, and this is how you make the change. In this particular instance, since marijuana was the one used in all three of them, early on, people argued the value argument and got the value thing established where people were like, okay, maybe we should relax our ideas of how bad marijuana is. And then once they did that, they came back in later with a proposition of policy change to make it legal in the states that have made it legal. So that was actually a two-part persuasive campaign: one, to do the value, and two, to go in and do the policy change. And sometimes you need to do that too. We won't do that obviously in class because you're only going to do one speech. But if you ever are in a situation where you need to make some major changes, sometimes you have to hit value first and then you hit policy. And one builds on